Okay. Now, thanks, Tracy, for being here. We've been experiencing a little bit of technical difficulties with Facebook on live, and then with Discord, but finally, it is recording and will be available for other media. So just a little bit of introduction for why the reason to make these dialogues or conversations. The initiative comes from a personal wish to share my own path, and the path of maybe at the beginning of desperation and confusion, and then starting to have things clearer. And in that path, many tools came to me, and one of the tools was family constellations and systemic constellation. And because of those, I know you 1 year or 2 years ago, and I really appreciate and honor the quality of the work of constellation. Yeah. And I think that for me, at least, it was useful to develop another kind of side, and a different perspective of things, in order to be happier and be more content. And the title of this talk is Inner Understanding as an Anchor for Personal Development, because I think that in order to have personal development in a greater sense, maybe we need to look some aspects that normally we don't look, like the emotional aspect, the psychological aspect, or many others, not only the intellectual approach that is quite valued nowadays. So in this manner, in this sense, I would like you to start asking you about your personal experience. That's quite valuable for all the people that is hearing here. How was for you, and how was your path at the beginning, and how you think your inner understanding helped you to be where you are now?
Cool. Well, first of all, I'd like to say thanks for the invite to be here to speak and to share with you all. And in a dialogue and in an understanding. And I think it's really good for others to see that that we've had our journeys too, to know that we've come from where we've come from, to a certain extent anyway. I describe my path as having been very colourful. I experienced a lot of very early childhood trauma, and but at the same time, I had two things running. I had trauma running that started very young, and then I also had the gift of seeing, so I could see spirit and hear spirit, and that was pretty traumatic too when nobody understood that. So I was sort of battling two things. But in that, there was always this knowing that it was going to be okay, that even though sometimes everything was really overwhelming for me, there was just this knowing that everything was going to be okay, that I'd find the tools that I needed. But in saying that, so my early journey in life was, there was a lot of addiction that started very early, and that was with drugs and alcohol, and a lot of I was very wounded, and so that consumed a lot of my life, while at the same time trying to strive to heal and accept the gifts that I did have. So I had decided that I would become authentic and stop consuming the substances which made me not hear and not be present with myself. So I started doing a lot of work on different maraes, and I actually started this with Erin Lewis because we had been friends for many years, since our children were little babies. and she invited me to do some mahi on a marae, and we started in Auckland, and then on long weekends, Labour weekend it was, we would go down to Wellington, and there was a constellation facilitator down there, and that was my first experience. That was 2012, and I'd had we just had been informed that my dad was terminal, and that sort of really rocked my world, because there wasn't much of a relationship with my dad, even though I saw him regularly, and that on an emotional level there was quite a shut off. So I put my hand up straight away and got to sit to experience the work, and I knew, I couldn't even tell you what happened really that day. It was so good I can't remember it, which is ironic, but at the same time they could be some of the best pieces of work that we do, because it shifted so much in my world and in the way I felt, that I knew that I needed to train in the work, because it felt like something that I would really understand. So I found a facilitator here in New Zealand that was willing to train, and embarked on training later the next year. And then every year I go to Australia and continue to do more, as well as online work. And it's the metaphor that we're onions and there's many layers, and it's such a profound and I can't even think of the word right now. The work, so it peels back a layer, but it leaves you feeling quite really held, generally really held, and free, and usually reconnected, and maybe even, well, it depends on the piece of work and what you're experiencing at the time. It's often called the movement of the soul, and I think that's probably the best description of what happens in the work. Because we're vibrational beings, we feel it in our body, we feel it somatically, and yet it's working on psychology and spirituality and energy medicine at the same time. So it's a mixture of the three, and it allows us in a way of tapping into the hidden aspects of whatever that is affecting us. So we have, I'll give you an example for myself. One of the pieces of work I did was around my relationship with my oldest brother, and wanting to know what was going on there. It was a bit messy, our relationship. So he was born, my mum was only very young, she was 20, she had him, and the next year she had another boy. And then, so I'm going to draw this because it's easier. When I do this in workshops, I get people to stand up. It's easier to describe. So we've got number 1 and number 2, right? Number 1 and number 2. And it was 20 and 21, she had these 2 boys, and for her system, it was a bit much. She got a postnatal depression, and it was just very overwhelming for her. And then she fell pregnant again, and number 3. And at 5 months, she lost him, and it was quite traumatic the way it happened. And the family thought, because we're going back early 60s, because she'd had postnatal depression, let's not make a fuss about it. They flushed him down the toilet, the little baby, and nobody ever talked about him. That's just what happened, maybe common practice back then, I'm not sure. So then she got pregnant with number 4 and lost him straight away, carried him for 8 weeks. And then because we never spoke about these 2, so my sister comes along, and she's number 5, but the family puts her here. So she came into a womb that was traumatized, and so she experienced a lot of difficulties in her early life with confusion, and everything was overwhelming. She struggled to read clearly, like everything was jumbled up. And so then I came along, and I was number 6, but she wanted me to be the oldest child, so she put me here. And because I was a little bit more confident than her, and so I would do the things that an older sister would do for the younger sister. So that put us all out of order. Can you see that?
Yeah.
That makes sense. And when we, in the constellation, there was a beautiful healing moment where we got to all line up in the correct order from 1 to 6. And that just, I could feel it running through my body, because all my life there'd been this, like, it was like an electrical pulse running through me, but it would get out of sync. There was something, and that was I'm standing in the wrong place in my family. And so the energy that was meant to run through the siblings was going ting, 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 haywire. So when we did this beautiful healing sentences and the movement, then there was a sense of being reconnected in the family, and being in my rightful place, and my sister as well. And the outcome of that was that the relationship between myself and my oldest brother just started to grow and heal really quickly. In fact, only a couple of weeks afterwards, he made contact with me. He didn't even know I'd done the piece of work. And then I noticed a connection with my children, my 2 daughters, because this piece of work had allowed me to think about the 2 pregnancies that I'd lost, and it gave my daughters some space in their proper place in the family. And so they had, their relationship grew, because there had been some difficulties between them as well. And then I noticed that behind me, my dad and his brother who hadn't seen each other for 15 years, within about 3 months after the constellation, they got together. And nobody knew that I'd even done this piece of work. It was for me to find out what was hidden in the dysfunction in my relationship with my oldest brother. And the movements that came afterwards was such a bonus that they rippled out for everybody else. Yeah. So and my experience with the work has been, I was really good at leaving my body, and constellation work has allowed me and shown me to being present through the work, through the many layers of that I've worked through, that there's a real presence in being in your body. Because like I said earlier, it's somatic, so we're feeling that in our cells. We feel the shift in our cells. What else? I'm taking some notes here.
I personally, I was telling you before we started in this call that just first, I really admire your work, and the work that Erin works is, well, for me it's different from that part of the world, from South America to here. It has different, a different touch, a different glimpse. And the other thing I find really interesting, and I'm new in constellations anyway, and is that for me constellation is a tool to make you aware of things, aware of the situation, and that awareness comes from letting go the idea that of yourself in some way, that you're the number one, that you're the most important thing in your family, the most important thing in the world, that everything has to do with you. So it's kind of reducing the perspective of your big me, and to be like maybe a little bit more aware of the wounds of your parents, of the wounds of your grandparents, of your country, of society. And I found out, well, in the last years, that some people as well like constellation and systemic work, but there should be, for me, and that's very personal, it should be a mature process where the person that comes to a facilitator realize that it's not so important. I mean, that person is not so important, you know? Yeah, you know what I mean? That I'm not
Yeah.
so important, and that's hard.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
What do you
Yeah.
think, Tracy?
Yeah, absolutely. It allows you to have insight, and sometimes the awareness of what someone else is feeling in your family, because of the representatives and what is being spoken in the field, and it allows you to be more compassionate and open your heart to what you felt like you didn't receive, but you can see why, or you have a more of an understanding. That you didn't receive enough love because of what your mother didn't receive, or your father.
What do you think is the end point? Sometimes I ask myself, maybe it's a very hard approach for myself. It's like sometimes I see clients, people coming 1, 2, 3, and it's okay as much as you need. But then I think, like, when people grow, you know, and I tell to myself, when we grow, when until when we need to see everything in the field and to just being aware that not all the world is just around us, and just, you know, that make that shift, and then that implies not every problem that we have go to a constellation. Otherwise, like, encouraging myself and finding the tools that I know, because I've been doing systemic coaching, whatever, and putting everything together and trying to have insight on my own. So that requires an upgrade of consciousness and awareness. So I know it's kind of polemic, maybe, what I'm saying, but what do you think?
So I didn't quite catch that first bit. Are you saying so some people don't move on as quickly? Is that what you're asking?
No. It's my perspective is, when do you think the work ends? When is the end point? Because sometimes people come back and come back and come back and want to continue doing constellation and forever, just to resolve issues. But when us start to think, okay, I have the tool, I have the awareness now, and now I can do the work on my own, and I can be aware. I can be aware of this, the situation in my country, my family, and this pain sensation of my mother. Every time she give me something hard on me, she tells me of, I understand that I don't react, instead of going to a constellation world, because the relation is still continue being so difficult. And so when do you think we mature, we grow?
Well, I think everyone's different, and some people have get it within 1 or 2 constellations, and then that's all that they need. And other people have the need for more. And some of us will go out and find other things to help us, like, you know, maybe they go to breath work, or TRE, you know, trauma release exercises, or they go to yoga, or they have body work, and that allows them to ground it in, to really ground in that work that they've done, so that it's not just sort of skimming the surface. Yeah. And allowing it to really anchor and reconnect those energy pathways that have been broken. I'm finding that the body work, or the doing something somatic with constellations, really, really helps. And I drum a lot as well, and I'll sometimes drum in workshops. But I find drumming is a great way to, because what it does, I was just talking to Sarah Payton earlier today, and she's a neuroscience scientist. Well, she does neuroscience in the resonant self, and she was saying that it activates the base of the brainstem.
Wow.
So, and I was actually a little bit nervous before we had this conversation. Just a little. I thought, oh, I'm going to ground myself. So my son and I, who's 13, we went into the lounge and we drummed together for about 10 minutes. And, it was great. It just really cleared me. I could feel my connection to the ground. So I think, back to your question, I think it's different for everyone. I think some people get it straight away and they are able to get a really clear path and understand that, that they can have tools, that their trauma can then become their resource. And others, depending on the depth of their trauma, they just need they need more.
That's interesting. And also, well, at least from the Buddhist perspective, from Buddhist philosophy, there are, they can say, two levels of comprehension. One level is the personal one that has to do with emotions, psychology, and probably a lot of things with family constellations, I see. But the other level of comprehension is the spiritual path. And the spiritual path has to do with transcending your own self and going beyond yourself, and maybe translating to another philosophy. They can say making contact with your soul or with an energy. Well, in Buddhist philosophy, there is no soul anyway. But the spiritual approach has to do with letting go the own ideas of yourself. And I found really interesting, and some papers I've read about how they explain healing is that maybe sometimes we need, in our path, we need like to recover or rediscover or re-signify, I don't know if that word exists, like make another meaning to our emotions, to our feelings, to our perception of ourselves. But it has to do with ourselves still. And the second that is not higher, is just a little bit more far away, I would say, has to do with just renouncing to yourself and just transcending that you are you, because our idea, you are you, that's it. Because why? Because it's simple, but at the same time it's hard to understand. Because if I would have a trauma when I was 7 years old, because everything changes and everything is impermanent, I'm not the same person of 7 years old. So I've changed. But it's my inability to let go my trauma that makes me suffer. So at the end is my inability to let go the idea of myself, and doesn't has to do much. My perspective is like, doesn't has to do a lot with the trauma by itself. It has to do with my inability to let go the idea of myself that was wounded, whatever, when I was 7. But just to remember that I'm not 7 anymore. I've grown up, and now have experienced many other different things, and I have all these resources. But even it could be still painful, but not, going into depression. Even can be like, man, I would like to have a better childhood when I was 7. But it's like different, in a different mood.
And trauma, has no times, like it stamps in your cells when it happens, but when things trigger it, it has no timestamp as far as, like you say, it's this letting go, but your cells sometimes think it's happening now, that trauma is still happening now.
But where do you think that can, I mean, how do you think things can be stored in the cells? If the cells are renewed completely in 3 months, how things stay if everything changes completely?
Because it's still in your DNA, still in your gene.
But even the DNA, the proteins and the amino acids changes, and it's not the same when you were 7.
Yeah, I know. It's an amazing. It's kind of like a what's the word? Conundrum? Is that the right word?
I don't know.
Where we know that, and yet you can have. So we know that, like for example, your liver is, the cells are constantly working to replenish. Yeah. And yet you can still have a liver disease that's been passed on through the family. So maybe, yeah, I'll get back to you on that one.
I'm just wondering, wondering these kind of questions and trying to understand like our idea of something solid, and because we think we have something solid, but really there is no solidity, because everything changes. We are not the same as I was 7 years old. Even my trauma, where is the trauma stored in a gene specifically? That's not true. I mean, physically speaking. So or maybe it's the story in somewhere that I cannot see, is beyond matter, but everything changes, and I see that it's most of our traumas are more traumas, because we don't know how to let go. And the trauma is genuine, exists, but it's because of us that we suffer more. Maybe if we would like realize that this event had happened, broken my heart, but just with that sense of humility of, okay, that's what it happens. And I can see, as you said, I can see the repercussions in my family. I can see repercussion, blah, blah, blah. And then being appreciative, having appreciation of your current life, because your present life is just a product of your past life. So, it's I think it's complex, and I wanted to bring it in this conversation, because sometimes constellation or all the other work, and quite valid, sometimes can be addictive, and we can be addicted to that work as well.
Yeah. There are sometimes people that just want to come back for more, and I invite people to come back and represent for other people too, because that's a great way to have more insight into your own system. Intention is really important, I think, when you come into this work, to have a clear intention to be open to receiving what's coming forward, because sometimes people want to look at it, but they also want to hold on to their story. Yeah.
That's the thing. Hold on in your version of your story, and how I think we all are in this way. We like holding our version of stories, and we love talking and creating our own story. And how important I see integration of the constellations with human values, the right value, the right qualities of the person, like humility, being patient. I see constellation as a work to build these qualities and appreciation. Even with a little bit, I feel appreciation. Even if I only had $10 per day to survive every day.
Yeah. And
And
it takes that little bit. That's all it takes to open up so much more, rather than having this whole block. Just that little bit. That's all that you need to start to open the world up to change for yourself.
what do you find challenging in your work, in your daily work with people?
Well, that would be one of them. Would be the one. Sometimes the people that come. I think there's a kind of, they're hoping for a validation of their story being correct, or they want to be validated as the victim rather than moving through it. Yeah, that's can be stressful, or not stressful, challenging. Yeah, I get such a variety. I do a lot of one-on-ones here in my studio, and I do video calls, and that can be a little challenging, doing a video call with someone who's never even experienced the work. But yeah, I'm always up for a challenge too. So yeah. Did you want to broaden that question? Like, was there how?
No, if you want to speak something, that very welcome.
I haven't really thought about it. What's challenging? I guess in the beginning, challenging was trying to get people to understand it, because we're working in the multi-dimensional field, so the field that others can't see, but we feel it. So there's some great exercises. Sometimes now, it's because I'm becoming more well known. It's one of my challenges can be sometimes just to have time to gather in between clients, but that's not a bad thing either. I'm lucky where I live. There's beautiful bush around us, so that really helps me to ground back in. What else will I find challenging? No, I don't so much.
I think that coming back to the original title of this talk, inner understanding is what I understand is understanding that we are not as divine as we think. Sounds hard. And I know that there are many places and many things that said you are divine, that the energy of God. Oh, that's okay. But we are not only that for me. I mean, we are everything. And that makes sense for me, because sometimes we think we want to be a saint. We want to be Mother Teresa. We want to be like so validated in a way that I'm so poor, I'm so good, but this happened to me, I'm the victim, blah blah blah. And inner understanding, maybe for me, is realizing that I'm everything. I'm a lustful person. I'm grumpy person, greedy person, but and other opportunities, I'm very compassionate, I'm very generous, I'm patient. With some people, I'm really impatient. And all these aspects of myself comes together. And I don't have to hide any of them. But what I learn is I have to be aware of not um, doing harm to others with my attitudes. And I find that's the core of the inner work, inner development, just to release the opportunity to embrace all aspects of yourself, but have restraint to not make harm to others with your attitudes, and do not be harmful, as the Buddhist philosophy would say, and be helpful, even if you don't like. Be helpful, and that is the training. It's like I just said. I was talking. Um, Normally, I'm not very generous person, but because I'm not generous, every time I feel like this is mine, like, Smeagol from the Lord of the Rings, this is my precious. Every time I would like to have this, because I have to practice generosity, so okay, take it. And inside of me, it's like, oh man, I would like to take this forever, but I know I have to practice generosity. Okay, take it, feel free. So that's the funny part, that even if we recognize ourselves as lustful, grumpy, or very selfish, it's okay. And but the way we relate to others, because we are defined through the relationship with others, these relationships defines ourselves. So that's the right field to develop when I'm with others.
Yeah, absolutely. You can't give to others. You can't. You have to work on yourself to be able to be of value for yourself. Because even though, like you said earlier, it doesn't all revolve around you. It doesn't, but it does at the same time. Because to be of any value and to move your shit, excuse the expression, you have to want to do it for yourself. For no other reason but for yourself, to move on. So practicing generosity or gratitude or kindness, and every time you're practicing it, you're also reflecting that within yourself. Yeah. And if there's something that it's really hard, then have a little look inside and wonder what that's stuck on or where that's coming from. And we all have to do it. There'll be things that trigger us. People might say something that's genuinely an innocent comment, and we can take it the wrong way. Look at that one.
What would you say are the qualities that help you most in your personal path?
Believing
In what?
Believing in, good question. Just
if there is something, though, maybe it's just belief in, I don't know.
It was just in a knowing that it would be okay, believing that everything would be okay, that that there was a bigger picture to my experiences, and learning to be kind to myself. That was a really big one, because that inner dialogue can be pretty harsh sometimes.
That's true.
Practice that. The ho'oponopono, you know that?
Yeah,
that's really good. A really good tool. And so for those who don't know it, it's I'm sorry. Is it this is the way I say it. I say, I love you, I'm sorry, please forgive me, thank you. And I say that to myself, not to the other person, but it's to myself for maybe having a judgment or in a dialogue of criticism or and in a battle of something. And then I just stop. And sometimes I do it in front of the mirror. It's a great a great technique, and really connecting in with the eyes, because that was something I couldn't do for many years, was even to look at myself, to look at my eyes. And so that has been a really great tool. And that knowing that things were happening for a reason, even though they weren't pleasant sometimes. And sometimes I'll be kicking myself saying, what did I do that for? But yeah, I guess it's a faith, but at the time I wouldn't have said that. I wouldn't have even used those words.
It's curious because faith, well, nowadays we live in a society that is lack of faith, maybe, or confidence. But faith, for me, is something we all have, but doesn't come like, oh, I'm a devoted person. It comes from little by little. The more you do, the more faith you have. The more results you have, the more faith you have. The more. So it's increasing every time you're walking. And well, maybe it has to do with that is invisible aspect that we can explain, that put things together, that aspect of consciousness.
In the larger field.
Yeah, that everything connects. Yeah, and
I think often we're so in our mind that we don't realize. I know from, earlier in my life, I was in my mind, spending a lot of time trying to get out of my mind with substances, but in that not recognizing the wider field. So having experiences on an energetic level of those other things that are around us, whether it's spirit energy or the consciousness of the field or whatever you want to call it. There's many different layers of stuff, but we're so in the mind that we're not allowing our bodies to feel it. And that and then that blocks yourself from being connected.
And just to, because we are gonna finish soon, and just more than the personal question that, well, who knows, maybe someone hears and say, oh man, that's a good point to start. And what are the, if you have to choose three things, three qualities or virtues or characteristics, and come back to your past, you have to choose those qualities or virtues or whatever now that you're aware, that or your previous experience, and you have to come back from the beginning, year zero. What would you choose, Tracy? And then I will answer for people who is interested as well.
So the qualities that I have become aware of on my journey, you're asking?
What will you choose to come back to your, they give you a chance to come back to your past, but with tools, and you have to choose the tools, qualities or virtues, whatever.
Yep. Self-compassion would be my first. Yep. Was very hard on myself. Self-compassion. I think I always had an open heart, even though it didn't work so well for me at times. So I think my other would be patience. Patience would be really, because I wanted things, because I knew something was big coming, like there was more to go, and I just wanted things to happen faster. So patience. and tools would be to be body connected. Yeah. So, to be doing things that were related to, like yoga, and which I'm fully loving. Things that keep me to be present. Yeah. Because I keep leaving my body. So that would be self-compassion, patience, and presence. Presence.
Well, I would choose patience as well. I think that we live in a world now that everything is goal orientated. So you have to come to an end, and the more results you give, the more productive you are. So we need a sense of feeling the results, and that implies time. So I think for me would be as well patience, and the patience connects with a space of confidence, just believing that things will come in their own time, and just doing the things that you have to do and I have to do, and just do it. Don't think too much, I would say to myself. Just do it. Be patient and just do it. And the others two would be, self-compassion. I think the duality, as the Buddhist philosophy says, is very is probably the most dangerous weapon, because sometimes we are very hard on ourselves, and other times we are like, everything is for you, and very open. So we are in the extremes. And that's the hardest part, that not waving between extremes, instead bringing the gap a little bit closer, and bringing that gap, it makes your life more brings harmony. And the other thing I would bring maybe is like joy, that sense of joy. And not everything has to do with me. Not all the people talks about me. People don't care what I do, what I speak, how I dress. People don't care, and just be free of my own judgment. And maybe be aware of my own judgment. But even with my own judgment, just do what I have to do, if I'm not hurting anybody, obviously. Well, that would it. That would be. I don't know, Tracy, you have something to say, something before we finish?
Well, thank you for this opportunity to have the dialogue and open questions. And I'm going to see if I can get back to that answer for you about the cells, because it is an interesting one, even though epigenetics tells us that things are passed down, and we also know that cells reproduce. So there's a little conundrum there that I need to find that answer for you. Everybody else, and myself, of course. What else? Oh, I'm just so grateful for the work and facilitators like yourself. Here in New Zealand, we're starting to grow, and it's so needed. The work is so needed for all of us on every level. Yeah. So I look forward to the community growing and getting stronger. And and my goal is I hosted a facilitator from the States recently, and my goal is to host more internationals.
That would be amazing. Amazing.
Yeah, Sarah Payton's coming next year. That's confirmed. So that New Zealand can have a taste of facilitators who've been doing it for a lot longer than we have in New Zealand. We have our own flair, we have our own flavour here. of how we do it, but it's great to learn from others as well. So that's one of my goals.
That would be amazing, Tracy. I really, really appreciate, I'm very grateful for the opportunity to know you, to know your work, to know Erin as well. I connect always with you, Erin. It's like, for me, it's kind of, if you're like sisters, you know, I always put you and Erin together. But anyway, I'm very grateful for having you, and that you make time for this. And also, I really hope that people and us start broaden our minds. And the more we open our minds with people, with facilitators, with knowledge, with whatever, and in this world, every more time we are like challenged with more things. Even I'm in the science field, but I'm really interested in these things. And I really encourage all the people that's watching now, just to listen maybe at the beginning, and to be interested, and then ask, and don't be shy to explore if you have time, if you have the possibility, the money. And we can find surprises in places that we don't know.
Yeah, and it's never what we think. We have a story running, what's going on, and this is where it came from. Constellation, and it'll be like, oh, I didn't see that coming. But you feel it in your cells, and you feel it in your whole aura and the bigger field of things. And yes, I totally agree. I encourage people to explore, to explore the work, and don't be afraid.
Just do it.
Come and witness, and if you're unsure about sitting in the hot seat or doing your own work, then I encourage people to come along, and sometimes they do it one or two or three times before they actually go, right, I'm ready to do this, or they come and see afterwards for a one-on-one.
Well, thank you, Tracy. I really hope you have a great, long weekend, and enjoy.
Yeah. Yes, you too. Thank you so much.
Okay, bye to everyone.
Thank you.